Let us then begin with the first area, which deals with the theory of knowledge. How do we look at knowledge from an Islamic perspective? And we're talking about both what is called secular and what is religious. So we're currently now starting session 1, and basically 20 minutes have gone by. So though this session was supposed to be an hour session, we may have to shorten it a bit in order to fit everything in within the time frame that we have designated. So there is a common misconception that we have to address here in this area concerning the theory about knowledge. And this conception is that as long as your school has Islamic studies, Arabic, and Quran, which are taught along with secular studies, you have an Islamic school. However, this approach is really not the Islamic approach. This is a direct product of the Christian approach to education, where secular subjects were taught separated from religious subjects. And this was based on a statement attributed to Prophet Jesus, in which he was supposed to have said, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And this is found in Matthew 22, verse 21. Of course, it was in another context. You know, Jesus had asked about a coin, image which was on the coin, and he was being asked about taxation and so on and so on. And he said this, made this statement in that particular occasion. But it's been taken to be a general principle of separating the religious from the secular, the worldly. Give Caesar what is his, and give God what is his. So this approach was found in the schools that were built in the colonial era, that were set up in many parts of the Muslim world. And although they were saying this, unto God what is God's, and unto Caesar what is Caesar's, they were actually sticking some of what was God's, as they saw God, you know, Jesus, in the secular side too. So the teacher, being a missionary, you know, would put Christian thought into all of the material that he could. Back home in the West, unless people were in particularly strong Christian areas, you know, where the Bible Belt, where people were heavily into the Bible, there was more of the separation. And the separation reached the point ultimately where with the rise of secularism, it was decided that religion should no longer have any place in education. It was to be taken out of education altogether, as well as out of government, out of economics, out of everything. You know, it should be only kept on the personal, individual level, and otherwise affairs were decided democratically, you know, according to secular principles. So this became the norm from the Western perspective. Now we have inherited this, And so we are now looking at this massive educational material that is coming at us, coming from the West, which is secularized. And we are not considering Islamizing that. We are considering that we have to teach it because our children have to learn this knowledge and be able to work in the various sciences and fields, etc., that they choose. But at the same time, we want them to be good Muslims. So we'll give them Quran, Arabic, and Islamic studies. So we added that on to Islamize our school. But reality is that it leaves the student with a bipolar situation. You know, they are secular in the secular classes, Islamic in the Islamic classes. They're living in two worlds. And of course, the secular world is actually more important because that's where you're going to get your job, you're going to earn your money, take care of your family, live a good life. It's going to depend on that. So people tend to relegate the Islamic side to these few classes. You don't really have to pass them, just at least attend them. We hope that inshallah it will touch your heart somehow, some way. And that's our Islamic school. Now, some schools, yes, the owners are very much Islamic. They want it to be Islamic. They've tried to hire, Muslim teachers, to try to make a difference. And this is a good idea, good effort. But we're going to look at that in a little more detail. For now, we need to understand from the Islamic perspective that all knowledge, all true knowledge comes from Allah. As Allah said in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. Adam was taught the names of everything, the ability to categorize, to put labels on, which allows us then to build on the knowledge that we have. This was given to Adam, and we have all inherited it as human beings from Adam. And that knowledge, as we said, as Allah Himself said, came from Him. He is the one who taught Adam this knowledge. However, the knowledge which we have, when put all together, has to be looked at in or after analysis. Because the knowledge which really comes from Allah, we talk about as true knowledge. Knowledge in general may be divided into two categories: true knowledge and false knowledge. Now, true knowledge is that which comes from Allah. False knowledge, we can say, is that which comes from shaitan, or those who believe or see themselves, they are followers of Satan. They may promote false knowledge. And of course, all of this gets mixed up together. We don't see a difference between it when it comes at us from the West. However, false knowledge, we can include in false knowledge the Darwinian teachings, which claim that human beings came into existence by accident and that they evolved from lower creatures to higher creatures and eventually became human beings. They share a common ancestry with monkeys and apes. This teaching of Darwinism we consider to be false knowledge. It doesn't mean that there is not true knowledge mixed up in there, because of course they're basing their arguments on bones and artifacts, etc., that they found. And these are real things that they're found, although they have in the past falsified certain things and created things that really weren't there. And, you know, this history of Darwinian thought has gone through a number of different stages. Anyway, the end result, the claim that our existence is a product of accident, a cosmic accident, we reject. If you believe in God, then you believe that God created it all. So that is false knowledge, and whatever is related to it. So studies in, or the belief, for example, that we will be at some time able in the future to stop the biological clock. You know, we all have biological clocks which are running down. At a certain point, that clock stops and we die. But there are those who believe eventually we'll be able to stop the clock and still keep living. We just don't get any older. We'll stay at whatever age we reach. So the theories and concepts on which this is based, we would consider also to be false, because we know Allah has already told us very clearly in the Quran, كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ. Every soul will taste death. So we're going to die. There is no stopping that clock and staying alive. That clock will tick out, and when it ticks out, we die. There's no way around it. So, leaving that body of false knowledge aside and focusing on the true knowledge has two basic sources. One source, which we could call revealed knowledge, that's what's come from revelation. Wahi has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which He revealed to the prophets, He revealed to Adam, and all the prophets up until Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the last of the prophets of Allah. So we call that revealed knowledge, and that is absolutely certain knowledge. That's part of the true knowledge package. On the other hand, we have what we may call acquired knowledge, knowledge which we learn from experience, research, accident, however you may call it. We end up acquiring this knowledge through efforts or without efforts, and it's real and true knowledge also. Now, that also comes from Allah. So when you look at certain discoveries, like the internet, the scientists in America and Europe working on the God particle research, trying to find the ultimate building block of life and the universe. They stumbled across the internet while exchanging material. So they weren't searching for the internet. They accidentally found it, as they call it. We don't believe it was an accident. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it at that time. They acquired that knowledge. They didn't receive revelation, but they were given access to the knowledge at that time. And similarly, we know that X-rays discovered by Madame Curie were a product of accident. In her own laboratory, her hand passing between radium and photographic film, she saw the bones of her hand on that photographic film when she passed her hand between the two, and there we have X-rays. X-rays, which are so critical to medicine today, was found by accident, and so on and so forth. Your major discoveries, scientific discoveries, were by quote-unquote accident. But as we said, this is the law opening certain doors and allowing human beings to access this knowledge at that time. Now, the revealed and the acquired knowledge can be further subdivided into useful and useless knowledge. Useful and useless knowledge. Now, useful knowledge, revelation, we say, basically all revelation should be useful knowledge. Yeah, useful knowledge. But there are times when that knowledge may not be useful. When Allah spoke about the Jews and warned us to not be like them, be like donkeys carrying books on their backs. He gave this simile in the Quran. Himarun yahmilu asfara. This example was showing the uselessness of knowledge to some people. Meaning they had the knowledge, they could have benefited from it and used it, but it became useless knowledge to them because they carried it like books on their backs. So it's like Allah reveals a verse of the Quran. Now, we're supposed to read this verse, understand it, and implement it in our lives. But some people say, well, no, the good thing to do with the verse is to roll it up in a piece of paper, put it inside of a locket and wear it around your neck. So now that verse, which was useful knowledge, became for you, wearing it in that ta'weez, that amulet, it became useless knowledge for you. So though in and of itself, it was useful knowledge, relative to yourself, it became useless knowledge. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was known to make a dua which he repeated oftentimes, in which he said, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa'. O Allah, I seek refuge in you from knowledge which is of no benefit. This is recorded in Sahih Muslim, narrated by Zayd ibn Arqam. So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to seek refuge from knowledge which was useless. Also from the acquired knowledge, we have useful and useless knowledge also. And again, it's relative. If it's true knowledge, ultimately it is useful. But if it's true knowledge at the wrong time, in the wrong place, by the wrong people, etc., it can become useless knowledge. So, for example, we know till today, from the early 90s till today, the numbers of people who are homeless in America, in the United States, the number of people are more than 4 million. More than 4 million people. And at the same time, we also know that the money which America spent to send the first rocket ship to Mars in order to find out the composition of soil on Mars was more than $4 billion. So we have to say at that point that the knowledge which was sought with that $4 billion was useless knowledge. If you have 4 million of your citizens living in the streets, and I know some people find it hard to believe, they say, no, maybe he's making it up. No, go on Google, homelessness, the homeless in America. You'll see the numbers. It's around 4 billion. 4 million. It's remained 4 million over the past almost 15 years. Or 25 years, sorry. From the early 90s, I saw those numbers, 4 million. Until today, I recently checked, and the number they're saying is still around the same, 3.8 million, so on and so on. So we say that seeking knowledge of the composition of dirt on Mars is useless knowledge. That money should have been spent instead providing homes for the homeless. So, added to that, where people defend the seeking of useless knowledge, they say that one should seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So even if you can't see use in it, it's useless as it appears. But just to go and seek it anyway, this is a good pursuit. However, from the Islamic point of view, though this idea has been around for over 1,000 years in the West, from the Islamic point of view, knowledge should be sought primarily for its benefit. That is the basic principle governing the seeking of knowledge from the Islamic perspective. Knowledge for its benefit. And Prophet Muhammad had said, "Khairun nas anfa'uhum linnas." He said that the best of people are those most beneficial to people. This is authentically recorded by At-Tabarani and Darqutni, and it's been authenticated. It's narrated also by Jabir ibn Abdullah. So, the best of people are those most beneficial to people, to the masses of people. So, when we are seeking that knowledge, this should be in the mind of those seeking it, something we should instill in the children as among the principles for seeking knowledge from the Islamic perspective. Now, if we look at the definition of education, education is most appropriately defined as the process by which a civilization conveys its cultural values to the next generation. It is about culture, conveying culture. I know we oftentimes think that the education is facts. You're passing on facts, mathematics, science, geography, history, etc. These facts, as we pass them on, we feel we're educating people. But really, education comes in a package. Yes, that package includes these facts, but the packaging is cultural. So, when Western civilization took the route of removing religion from education, it secularized education. The cultural package which it taught its learning was a secular one. And obviously, this is in clear contradiction to the Islamic view, which, stated in the Sharia, means that Islam governs everything. There is nothing that we can say Islam has no realm or no say in. Islam has something to say about everything. This is the Islamic point of view. Qul inna salati, as Allah said, say, indeed my prayers. Inna salati wa nusuki, and my sacrifices, my living and my dying, wa mahyaya wa mamati, lillahi rabbil alameen, is for Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. Everything, prayers, sacrifices, living and dying, should be for Allah, the Lord of all the worlds, meaning that Islam governs everything. And that's why we have the 5 principles, the 5 rules which govern everything that the Muslim looks at in this world. Either that thing is wajib, please go back to the previous slide. Either that thing is wajib, obligatory, or it is recommended, or it is neutral, neither recommended nor obligatory, or it is disliked, or it is prohibited. The ahkamul khamsa, the 5 laws which govern everything. So from the Islamic perspective, Islam is involved in everything. It cannot be separated. So for us to achieve Islamic education, it then means we have to bring all of this body of knowledge that we have inherited from Western civilization, we have to bring it within the umbrella of Islam. And perhaps the most noted issue that we are faced with when absorbing, being inundated by Western knowledge from a Western cultural package perspective is the lack of morality, where morality was taken out of the educational process altogether. Because morality came from the Bible, and the Bible was put aside, and we're supposed to decide what's right and wrong based on democracy. So when the Bible said that adultery was bad, and democracy said that, well, whatever goes on between an adult male and an adult female is their own business. Religion doesn't need to get involved in it. As long as it's consenting adults, then anything is okay. Adultery is not a crime. Fornication is not a crime. Rape is a crime, yes. Pedophilia is a crime, yes. Incest was a crime. That's no longer a crime in many countries of the West now. There was no stable principle of morality. What was considered to be evil in the not too distant past, homosexuality, for example, became acceptable. Nothing wrong with that. This is alternative choice. People can choose to do what they want to do. They're consenting adults. So that approach, obviously, Islam has another approach. And so Islam needs to bring back morality into the classroom. So the educational process, Islamic educational process, requires us to bring religion back into the classroom, and with it, morality. So a moral perspective should be taught in all of the educational system. All of the programs should have attitude, a moral foundation, giving us a moral perspective. And that moral perspective, obviously, is an Islamic moral perspective. And this is how we have to look at everything which is taught. Now, when we look at this process of Islamization, when we look at the process of Islamization of education, it might involve Islamization of knowledge itself, or it may be focused on Islamization of the educational process. These are two approaches. Move on to the next slide, please. Now, the Islamization of knowledge is very complex. It's philosophical. It involves going back and looking at what constitutes knowledge, how is knowledge acquired, how is it transmitted. You know, it's a huge topic. And in a sense, it involves reinvention of the wheel, meaning we just don't take Western knowledge as it has come to us. We don't take it. We need to go back and look at the sources of all of these areas of knowledge and develop another point of view, another way to view all of this. And of course, that is a huge challenge. This is a challenge, you know, that Muslim educationalists had engaged in back in the 70s. I remember seeing some 4 or 5 volume encyclopedias written in Mecca after a series of conferences that were held there regarding the Islamization of knowledge. Dr. Ismail Farouqi was one of the leading proponents of this approach. May Allah have mercy on his soul. He had a large following amongst educationists, and they engaged themselves in this process. And I'm not saying that it has no value, but it is a long and a complicated process. It's a process so complicated that though all these volumes were written back in the 70s, more than 35 years have passed, and we're no further ahead than where we were then. It has not been transformed into anything practical which schools can use today. So instead, as Muslims took knowledge from China, the printing of paper, and developed printing presses and printing books, and brought the whole book production to the West. They didn't go back to try to find another way, an Islamic way to make paper. No, they took what the Chinese had done. Similarly in mathematics, you know, the zero, which the Indian civilization had stumbled upon, they took that and added it to their counting system, the 1, 2, 3, 4 that we know now as Arabic numerals, and they just built on it. So the other approach in terms of Islamization of education is building on the best of the West. What the West has come to, what are facts, true knowledge, useful, beneficial knowledge, we take that and we represent it in an Islamic package. This is what I am proposing as the practical way to take on this task, which can produce results within 1, 2, 3 years. So we build on what came before. And this is something I've always been concerned with in the various meetings I had in the mid-90s with Islamic organizations, global Islamic organizations like IBIR. We discussed at length. I found that everybody was focused on the Islamic studies curriculum. And you know, as I was saying, I thought we had gotten, we had about 3 or 4 different books which were printed, with the full Islamic curriculum there. They weren't perfect. They needed improvement, etc. But I felt that the main thrust, and there were a few others who agreed with me, that the main thrust should be, rather than printing another set of Islamic studies books, which are better than the ones that are currently available, that we needed to print a set of science books, biology books, mathematics books, English books, etc., which were from Islamic perspectives. And this fell on deaf ears for the most part. There are some who agreed, but most people, they were focused on, because they had Islamic schools, they wanted their Islamic curriculum to be the best that it could be, so the energies, huge energies were spent, finances were spent in trying to produce an Islamic, the perfect Islamic studies curriculum. What I did at that point, with the help of IBIR, financially, alhamdulillah, they provided some finances to help me develop an alternative route. And that was to develop textbook series in other subjects. And as I said, the approach that I took was building on the best of the West. So what I did, I chose English. I had seen in the school which I had taught for about 10 years in Riyadh, Manawat Riyadh schools, that the English series which was used there was called the Ginn Readers. They were readers for people who, having studied the grammatical principles of the language, etc., they would need reading books which would develop their skills in the language. So they had this complete series from pre-kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. So I said, let me try to tackle this. So between myself, and I hired a sister from the United States with a background in early childhood education, and using the Ginn Readers as a guide, I began to develop textbooks as readers for English from pre-kindergarten up to grade 3. We produced between us, between the years of 97 and 99, 1997, 1999, about 3 years, we produced 56 books of this series. And the idea was that this would have been an example. Alhamdulillah, the schools, Muslim schools, they loved the idea, they bought the books, etc. But the idea was to show what could be done, that people would be motivated to set up an institution or institutions which would produce books in all of the fields. But unfortunately, or as Allah willed it, I couldn't find anybody to make that kind of commitment, body or bodies, to put resources in producing alternative texts. And the alternative text route, though we were able to accomplish what we did in 3 years, I mean, that was only the tip of the iceberg. We had all the other subjects. We didn't even finish. We only went up to grade 3. We didn't go up to grade 12. Of course, things becomes easier as you go on ahead. As the early grades tend to be more complicated. With artists, getting artists to produce, because a lot of the early books for children are in the form of pictures, etc. So we took 3 years to produce what we did, but in order to do all of the other subjects, it would take some time and resources. So after trying that, trying to spread it and to encourage people, etc., I did that for a few years. I came to the realization that I needed to take another route, that it really wasn't going to happen through this route. And that other route was the route of lesson plan Islamization. And that's what we're going to cover in the second session. Now, what we have covered so far is basically the concept of knowledge, theory of knowledge in Islam. And we've looked at the concept of secular and religious and its separation. We've looked also at the sources of knowledge coming from Allah, as we said, and the need to choose that knowledge which is useful, seeking knowledge which is beneficial. And we also made a distinction between the Islamization of knowledge itself and Islamization of education. And we talked about the complexities involved in Islamization of knowledge and the book production for that purpose. We also could include in the Islamization of knowledge itself. It is sharing in that area. It has its own complexities. An example of useless revealed knowledge. You know, as we said, in the case of useless revealed knowledge, that knowledge is useful in and of itself. However, when it remains without understanding, without comprehension, then it becomes relative to that person useless knowledge. For example, you know, teaching children the details of Hajj. You've got children in grade school, grade 1, 2, 3, to go into the details of Hajj Badal and, you know, Hajj Ifrad and Hajj Tamattu and go to all of this. What is the use for them? That's useless knowledge. It's enough Hajj, go to Mecca. You know, we give them the knowledge which is appropriate to them for their level of comprehension. To go into the details of zakah, if you have so many camels and how many camels do you have to give, you know, if you have this many camels. If you're living in a country that doesn't even have camels, then that kind of knowledge is useless knowledge for you. To go and memorize that knowledge, why? Maybe someday you might end up in a land of camels? No. At that time you can find out. You know? So putting in your head knowledge about things which are of no benefit to you, you can't use them. That knowledge just sitting there. Then we call that is what we may call useless knowledge. But it's relative speaking. It's different from false knowledge. False knowledge is false knowledge, period. It's not true knowledge which is false relative to this person or that person, no. Whereas useless knowledge, of course, false knowledge is useless knowledge too. I mean, it is useless knowledge in and of itself. It is fundamentally useless. Whereas when we talk about acquired and revealed knowledge, it is fundamentally useful. All true knowledge is useful. However, given certain circumstances, relative to the person who has that knowledge, it may be useless to them. Another question from Crystal. Can we educate using non-scientific texts such as fictional or sci-fi. Yes, it is possible to educate using non-scientific texts, which are fictional. It may be education from the language perspective, But, of course, it has to be taught in such a way that the people who are being taught it or using it know that it is not true. We don't want to get into the Santa Claus syndrome. We don't tell fairy tales in that way, where people believe it and they live it and all these kind of things. We don't tell about fairy godmothers. You put your tooth under your pillow and you wake up in the morning, you find some money in its place because your fairy godmother has given you this gift. No, this is all nonsense. We don't teach this. We stay as far away from this as possible. However, fictional, which involves, you could say historical fiction, things which are connected to reality, this world, could be used for educational purposes, to teach people morals, even to teach people something of history, and many other things can be used. David Copperfield's stories, we know, had a huge impact on the UK in terms of changing people's way of thinking, oppression of children and the poor and all these other kinds of things. It had, it was a part of a social revolution. So, these things could be used, but of course, always making sure that those reading them, those informed, those being told, know that it is not true.